Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. Today, I am quilting Scrappy Tracks, our 11th block for the Friendship Quilt Along, and we're going to be stitching this up a notch with some ruler quilting and walking foot quilting. So let's jump on the machine and learn how to stitch this together. So I've already gotten started on block number 11. I did some echo ditching around that star that's created in the center from how all of the stars come together. And I really want to emphasize that. I think what I'm going to do is echo ditch around that star and then maybe do a second row of straight line quilting around that too, just to kind of make that the dominant thing and kind of make these other stars or the other pieces of the stars more subtle. And I think that'll be really cool. So a couple settings that I have on my machine here. I have my ruler foot attached, and that is a type of darning foot. So I have my needle in the center position, straight stitch, and I have lowered my stitch length to 0. And what this does is it basically limits the movement of the feed dogs. So they're still moving, they're just bouncing up and down, but they're no longer feeding the quilt forward and potentially pulling against the quilt. Now, the reason why I don't like dropping my feed dogs is because I find it messes with my tension, and I want you to know that's an optional thing. You don't have to drop your feed dogs if you don't want to. On my machine, I have this grid glider. It's a nice slippery sheet. It's polyester, and it sticks on here really nice and firmly, so I don't have to worry about it. And it's kind of hard to even to pull it up a little bit. And it is exposed here, so you can see that the feed dogs aren't going to hit that. Even though I have them still, basically just bouncing up and down, it's not a big deal. Okay, so I pulled my needle up to the surface. I've got my slice ruler here. I'm lining that up with the ditch, and then I'm going to get started just gently pushing the quilt through the machine. And this is going to be a little bit tricky because, of course, I've got lots of seam allowances. I've got lots of pieces, lots of different fabrics, all kinds of things going on. So I'm going to really have to focus and concentrate on what I'm doing here as I work my way around this star. And this is, I think, going to be the trickiest line to stitch and echo ditch because I've got, so much stuff that could really be distracting and I could accidentally continue quilting longer than I want to. I just want to go around that center star. So I'm lining up the edge of the ruler, and I really want some sort of mark in order to guide me to stop, where I'm going to stop right here. So I'm going to line up the ruler going this way, and I'm lining up the line that is etched, the etched line that is 1/4 inch from the edge of the ruler. I'm lining that up with my ditch, and that's going to help me make a mark right there. And that's going to help me be able to know where I need to stop as I'm stitching around in order to guide that direction change. And this is just something that's, it kind of saves time as you're quilting around. You don't have to really stop and think about it. You don't have to kind of, stitch too far or accidentally stitch too short and have to keep rotating the block around. So there we go. I've got a few marks on place, and now I can get going. Now, ruler foot quilting is a style of free motion quilting. It's a type of free motion quilting. So if I take my hands off this and I continue to run my machine, obviously the quilt's not going to go anywhere. I have to actually be pushing it through, and this means that some of my stitches are going to get big, some of my stitches are going to be a little smaller. I got some pretty big stitches right there, not a big deal. You just have to kind of try and keep it consistent. So I'm going to try and start out slower, and that's a little too slow because obviously my stitches are going to get really, really tiny. So I want to try and just be consistent, nice steady movement, and keep also a steady movement of the quilt over the tabletop. There we go. That looked a little bit better. I think I was just maybe putting my foot down too much and then pushing too hard. Some of those are a little inconsistent too. It's one of those things whenever you're getting started for the day, maybe you're kind of starting cold. Think about that and understand that it really helps to just spend a little bit of time warming up your body, doing a little bit of stitching on maybe a sample project or a practice sandwich, and that really helps. I'm starting cold today, so that might be part of why my stitches are fluctuating so much. I do think that looked better, just pushing through as fast as I could and running the machine at kind of a medium speed. One of the trickiest things about free motion quilting is understanding the speed to movement ratio, and that is the speed that you're moving your hands and the speed you're running your machine. And I would say, in general, you're running your machine faster than you think, and you're moving your hands slower than you think you should. And a lot of times what throws it off is the sound of our machine, kind of makes us feel like, oh, we gotta move, we gotta move. That's a loud noise, and it certainly seems like the machine's running really fast. But really, to balance with that, it's a small hand movement. It's not a super speedy hand movement. It's a slow, steady push. Now you might be wondering why I continue to rotate the block. I mean, obviously this is ruler quilting. I should be able to quilt in all directions. I'm going to go ahead and mark this line here so that way it's ready for me. And then I'm going to show you that yes, indeed, you can quilt in all directions. It just might not always feel very natural. That's the reason why I will usually rotate, because I can better see what I'm doing. It feels just a little bit better, but understand that, yeah, ruler foot quilting is a style of free motion quilting, so you can absolutely quilt in any direction you want to go. If you've got a big quilt on the machine and that's the only angle you can stitch in, well then obviously you don't have a choice. But I can say those stitches were noticeably bigger, smaller, tinier, kind of much more inconsistent than the other stitches because that was an awkward angle. This is really what feels the best. It feels good to have your ruler set up there on the ditch and to have your hands, nice and square, parallel with the needle. I know my line's going to be straighter because it's all lined up like that. So there's lots of different reasons to rotate, and it doesn't take that much time. And another advantage too is we're working on a small project here, and this is really something that you got to think about one project at a time. If you're working on something block by block and small, use the advantage that it is, and don't feel like you've got to torture yourself, put it on there and not rotate it at all, because that's what you might have to do with a king size quilt. Yes, that's true. I probably wouldn't be rotating this as nearly as much if I was working on something bigger, but it just doesn't make sense to spend a lot of extra time rotating the quilt around and being really fiddly with it when you don't have to. Okay, I got 2 more lines to mark there and there. That looks good. Oops. Need my ruler to keep on going. Now, of course, I keep saying, this is a form of free motion quilting because I can, of course, quilt without the ruler. I can just push the block through the machine, and I'm just eyeballing the edge of that foot and trying to line that up nicely with the edge of the ditch because I'm echo ditching, so that can work too. So understand, if I wanted to wiggle off and go into a design like stippling, or I wanted to do some curvy lines and I didn't want to follow a ruler, well then that ruler foot is still going to be perfect. You can still do all of those things with a ruler foot versus with a regular darning foot. Let me show you what one of those looks like. This is a regular darning foot. You can use this only for freehand free motion quilting. Okay, you can only use this for, quilting wiggly lines, quilting stippling, quilting straight lines too, but that's all you can do with it. You can't use this with a ruler because this foot is designed to hop, number one, and it could potentially hop on top of the ruler, and then you would have a very bad day because your needle would crash into the ruler and then it would break your machine. Even if it doesn't hop, even if you've broken your foot to make it stationary, that's another video tutorial you can find on my website. Even if you've done that step, broken the foot and no longer hops, look at this, how thin this is. The other risk that you take in using a foot like this for ruler foot quilting is the ruler popping up over it on top, like this, and the ruler flipping up over the top of the ruler, the foot, and again, crashing into the needle, breaking your machine. You'd have a very bad day. So only use a ruler foot that is specifically designed for this style of quilting. And it's a very special foot. It has a high base. It has a very, very high edge, and this is one of the reasons why you have to be really careful when you use it and make sure that foot is always in the down position, because you can see here, if that foot was in the up position, my needle bar would crash against it. So you always want to be careful when you use it, always be very mindful, and yes, you can do everything that you do with free motion quilting with ruler foot quilting, but you can't do ruler foot quilting when you are using a regular darning foot. I hope that's not too confusing. Well, it's really funny. We now have 3 different styles of quilting we can do on a home machine. You know, and it really has opened up the field as far as what we can do with our home machines. We can do walking foot quilting, we can do ruler foot quilting, we can do free motion quilting. So just understand that there's just so many different things that you can do with your home machine and so many creative ways you can quilt your quilts. I undershot that line just a little bit so you can see I didn't have to rotate back in order to fix it. I just needed to move my ruler a little bit and it was fine. Okay, so now one more little line and my echo ditching is complete. I think this looks great. I'm super happy with that. And what's nice about this effect is it really has kind of punched out that center star and made that more dominant. You know, you can now see that more clearly versus it being a block of 4 stars. So I really like that effect. I think that really worked out nicely. Now I'm going to take the ruler and let's see here. How can I use the ruler? This slice ruler is just a little bit tricky because it's a wedge shape and it only gives you up to 3/4 of an inch front. If you use that innermost edge line, then you'd get a 3/4 inch spacing. And I don't really want to do that much quilting on this quilt. But here's something cool. A regular ruler, this is just a regular cutting ruler. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay, this kind of ruler can be used for ruler foot quilting. I bet you didn't know that, but it can only be used on machines with a low shank foot. So you'll need to check with your machine manual, you'll need to check online, just Google the name of your machine and then shank or feet, and you'll find if your machine is a high shank or a low shank machine. And then you can know if you can use just regular cutting rulers and buddy those up with your foot and be able to quilt with them. And I would say low shank machines, they're typically the cheaper quilting machines. Not to, you know, it's not a dog on it. It's actually an advantage. You know, these are the more inexpensive sewing machines, and so they are fairly common. So look around, you know, you can just see if your machine will fit. And the reason why I feel comfortable doing this is because, as you can see, that foot is designed to just hover, and that edge is more than thick enough, and that is actually the exact same thickness as the ruler that I was using here. So I feel perfectly comfortable using this ruler on this machine. Okay, so when I line this up, I find I'm going to be 1/4 inch away, and I might end up in that ditch. I don't really like that idea, so I'm going to bring it in. Yeah, I think that's going to be cool. So this is going to be, looks like 1.25 inches, and then I add 1/4 inch for the spacing of my foot, so that adds another 1/4 inch. So it's basically going to be a 1/2 inch spacing of these lines. And again, I want to go in and give myself some marks because that's going to be really hard. I mean, honestly, that would be impossible to really eyeball that and know where that direction change is going to be coming in. So I'm not going to even try. I'm going to go ahead and make some marks on my quilt. And this is one of those important things to test and know what marking pens and pencils come out of fabric and will work for you. I have been using, this is the Fons & Porter ceramic marking pencil. I've been using this on my quilts for years. I love it. It erases, the marks erase off with the end of the pencil. The lighter fabrics, if you have white background or any kind of light fabric, I use this water erasable fine line pen for that. Now, in order to wash out these marks, you have to actually soak your block, not spray it with water, soak the block. And so that's something to keep in mind to understand how these pens work and how they are erased. And you really have to keep that in mind. And of course, that's going to change how you decide to mark something or quilt something, because if you haven't pre-washed your fabrics, then you might not want to use a pen that requires your quilt to get wet. And this is one of those things, I really believe in getting my quilts wet. I really believe in washing my quilts. So that's one of those things that I always do. All of these fabrics, before they were pieced, they were all pre-washed. Okay, so I've got a couple marks in here that are going to help guide me. This is going to be pretty interesting, so here we go. I'm going to start, and I got to remember what line I'm lining up with. So if I had some handy dandy tape out here, if I had not hauled my tape in the house, I would just tape that so I would have that as a guide. But I don't, so I need to be just careful, and I also need to be mindful because it's really easy to line up with the quilting that I've already done too. I've just got to be mindful and really remember that I'm lining up 1/4 inch from the edge with the ditch. I've got to remember that. So this is going to be a little on the tricky side, but I think I can do it. All right, so I'm lining up here on the ditch, making sure that the ruler is lined up. So it's exactly where I want it. I drop the needle in the down position, bring it back up, and that pulls up my bobbin thread. And that's really important because it keeps the thread from making a mess on the back of the quilt. Really don't want it to be ugly. Okay. All right, so I'm aiming to hit this point and keep it nice and straight. I might want to put some true grips or something on the back of this. It's a little bit slippy, but I think if I hang on to it with my thumb down here, and I also have a good grip of it on my hand right here, then I'll be okay. An alternative, if you don't have a ruler like this, if you don't have anything, or it just doesn't feel comfortable or like a good idea to quilt with a bigger ruler like this, or a cutting ruler, then one idea would be to take the slice ruler and use it, but just simply mark all the lines on your quilt, and that's a-okay. You can mark the lines and then simply use those as a guide and follow them with your ruler. So there we go. And what you could do, you could either mark the line that you want to follow and line up your ruler foot like exactly with that, and then just know that you're going to be quilting 1/4 inch away from that. Or you could be lining up and marking 1/4 inch inside the line you want to mark. This is getting a little technical, but yeah, I hope you get the idea. Everything with ruler foot quilting is based on the 1/4 inch. Everything is dependent upon that. Looks like I did not mark that line. I need to know where that's going to be. It's easy to eyeball it when it was the inside of the block, but it's really tricky to eyeball that when you're coming from this direction and you're this far away. So yeah, everything is based on 1/4 inch. Everything is lined up so that you've got that 1/4 inch added with your foot. It's a 1/2 inch foot, and your needle's in the center position, so everything should be technically running on the 1/4 inch. Looks like I way overshot that. That's okay. And back it up a stitch. There we go. And keep on going. Come on down. I got another point right there. And this is working out pretty much exactly how I wanted it to. This kind of intensely echo ditch star, bringing this star out and echoing an inch and a half away from that ditch, is expanding it that much more on the surface. Of course, this is a really crazy block with lots and lots of patchy fabrics, so it's hard to see, but it's filling up the space really nicely. I really like this effect. It is actually proving to be more difficult than I expected. So let's think about a way of simplifying this, because this is actually, when something's a little bit of a struggle for me, and and I'm kind of just going, this is kind of hard, I'm making some mistakes here and there, let's simplify it. And I think the best way to simplify it is to mark all of the lines. So here we go. What I'm going to do, actually, I'm not going to mark all the lines. I'm going to mark the line that I can line up with my ruler, the ruler that's guiding me. So this is not the line I'm quilting. This is the line I'm guiding with my ruler. So there we go. So I want to hit that and come up, because that is, that's 1 1/4 inch. I'll line up my ruler with that line. Then there's 1 1/4 inch right there. You could also use masking tape. Let's actually grab some masking tape. I didn't have 1/4 inch, but I had 1/2 inch here next to the table, and I was eyeing that, going, I wonder if I could use that to help guide this. So here we go. I'm going to line this up. This time I'm going to go in, because I know I want to stitch 1.5 inches from the ditch. So if I'm lining up 1 inch from the ditch and I put the tape in place, then that should be the line I want to stitch on. So we'll just see if that works, if that's any helpful at all. And let's keep on going. Quilting is always an adventure, especially when you're trying something new, something different, you know, kind of shaking things up, going out of your comfort zone a little bit. It's very exciting. And I really think that that's really where it's at. It's the most fun. Looks like I overshot that again. That's okay. I want to line up, that's the line I marked. So I want to line up my ruler with that line all the way down, and I'm on the right track. And I'd say even if your lines aren't perfect, even if they're a little bit wobbly, even if they, you know, don't really do what you want them to do exactly, you know, maybe I might have undershot that, I might have overshot that. I'm not really actually sure. I'm kind of starting to get confused by all the lines I've marked here. This is the other downside of kind of being a little, you know, trying one idea and then trying another idea on the same thing can be counterproductive. So watch out for that. Don't mark too many different things at once. And this time I know I'm coming down and I'm going to be right on the tape when I stop. That's my goal. Okay. And this is the thing. It's good to understand that even if these lines don't come out perfect, even if they're not perfectly spaced, that's okay, because perfectly spaced lines, visually you're not going to really see it. Only if they were really, really close together. Let's say if the lines were maybe a 1/4 inch apart, would it be really obvious if they were veering to the left or right or messing up in some way? Okay, so here I'm on the tape. It's not my favorite. While I don't mind tape whenever I'm doing walking foot quilting, this isn't really my favorite when I'm doing ruler foot quilting. That just felt a little bit awkward. We'll try it one more time. I'm gonna peel off the tape and then reposition it. Let's see here. I go 1 inch from that ditch. Well, it's kind of off from where I am right now. I think that's going to be a little undershot. Let's see if that's lining up. It's not really lining up with what I'm wanting. I'm going to pull that off. Now, it's easier when I'm coming in this direction and I'm coming in. It's actually really easy to line things up and be fairly exact. It's when I'm doing that outer line, and this is another thing that's good. Identify where things get tricky. What angle? You know, what angle do you need to mark and what angle do you not need to mark? It's just not even a problem. And that's something to think about too. I'd say if you're doing this and you really want it to be fast, easy, no worries, no having to think about it or really question it, I'd say mark this. So do the echo ditching around the center square. You can do that with the slice ruler. That'll be super, super simple. Do your echo ditching around the center star with the slice ruler. And then take a ruler and measure. You're measuring 1.5 inches from the ditch and mark that line. Just mark the entire line, and then you can follow it with walking foot quilting, free motion quilting, ruler foot quilting. It doesn't matter. You can follow it with anything. But I do think that that would make it a lot easier. It's just really hard to line up things when they're this far apart. And I would say this is one of those examples of where, you know, you try a certain style of quilting and you think, oh man, this is going to make it so much easier. No, I really think walking foot quilting would make this style much easier. Just doing this straight line quilting as an echo 1.5 inches away from something, that's going to be easier to do with your walking foot. Okay, so I'm going to continue working through this, fighting my way out. I'm going to figure it out, I promise. And I will show you what it looks like, and then we'll move on to the border and have some fun quilting that space next. So I decided to do just some simple straight lines through this border. I really like that. It kind of echoes what we did in block number 1. We did straight lines through that pieced border too. So I taped this off. I just used 1/2 inch masking tape, ran those along the seam lines, and now I switched to walking foot quilting, and I'm just running my needle right along that tape. So this was something I tried with ruler quilting. I tried using the tape and lining up the needle so that I was running along the side of it, and it just didn't work. I didn't like the feel of it. But I love this for walking foot quilting. Something about it just really works for me. So you kind of got to just experiment with these different things and see what works and see, you know, where it really clicks with your brain, and you can see the line that you're quilting along and it's nicely marked and it just makes sense to you. I ended up finishing up the star with the ruler, but I just simply marked those lines to finish them off, and that worked out great. And then this border, as you can see, super, super quick. And I really don't think anything else would work well in this area except maybe echo ditching these rectangles. You know, when you have such a linear design, sometimes just running across it is a really great design idea, because doing anything else, trying to do something more complicated here, would probably just get too busy, too messy. So as you can see, very, very simple quilting using that masking tape as a guide. And what I love about the masking tape is if you haven't pre-washed your fabric, you know, if you're worried or leery about using a fabric marking pencil, well, you know, tape just comes right off. Now the one thing you want to do is make sure not to leave the tape on for several days. So let's say, you know, you've taped up and you've got your border ready to go. Go on ahead and knock out all of those lines of quilting and remove the tape. You can see I started here in the batting area, so I can just clip those seam allowances short. And then once you stitch the line, go on ahead and remove it so it's off the quilt, and it's not going to leave any sort of gummy, sticky residue on the quilt. You know, like I said, I would kind of stick on as much tape as you're going to use in a day and then get it back off again. I would not leave it on, especially not overnight. I just don't think that would be good for the fabric. Okay, so let's pull up thread. Got one more line to stitch and then it's done. So here we go. Tuck those thread tails underneath the foot and get started stitching again. So it's important to understand there's just so many different types and styles of quilting these days to play with. And there's no such thing as, you know, the wrong style of quilting, you know, or even the wrong design. I don't want you to feel like, you know, there's any kind of wrong choice. It's just understand that there's going to be easier choices than others. So if I was trying to do this with, let's say, regular free motion quilting, that would feel like a little bit more of a struggle because I would have almost too much freedom, too much movement of the block, and I would be probably wiggling and wobbling quite a bit. A walking foot is easier. It's the easiest way to do straight lines, unless of course you've got a long arm and you have channel locks on that long arm. That's a locking device that keeps the long arm moving in a straight line. So really, I think walking foot quilting, don't ever knock it. Understand it's a very, very simplistic form of quilting, and it really works great. And just in case, I realized I forgot to tell you about the settings for walking foot quilting. The only thing that I change is I increase my stitch length and take it up to 1.5 millimeters, and that is because the feed dogs are up, they're engaged, the feed dogs in combination with the walking foot are what is actually guiding this block. So I can take my hands off of it, and as you can see, it will feed itself. And that is just the unique nature of walking foot quilting. That's just how it works. But you have to make sure that the quilt is always guiding and gliding straight through the machine. That's the one downside, but as you can see, that was really, really quick and really simple to knock out those straight lines. And here's what it looks like whenever I finish quilting block number 11. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning more about walking foot quilting and ruler foot quilting. You know, it's really one of those things. You never know what style of quilting is going to be easier for the design you've got in your head. And I certainly learned spacing out those lines wider apart. It's far easier to stitch that with a walking foot than with ruler foot quilting. So even I'm learning something from this quilt along, and I absolutely love that. So come and check out the pattern for this block and learn along with me. You can find it at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.